Welcome back to episode 33 of the Service Design Podcast. This episode, we're speaking to another winner of the Service Design Awards, the Best in Private Sector. We're speaking with Amjid Rasool from Tesco Bank and Paul-Jervis Heath from Modern Human, who helped redesign the bank's customer complaint experience. If you want to find out about their pop-up design studio, keep listening. So we're speaking to Paul-Jervis Heath and Amjid Rasool. Paul is principal at Modern Human and Amjid is head of service design at Tesco Bank. And we're going to talk about the project where they won the Service Design Award, Best in Private Sector, Project Phoenix Service Design for Tesco Bank. Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So maybe apart from my very brief introduction, could you both introduce yourselves? And then our listeners also know which voice goes with which name. Maybe Paul, could you start?
Yeah, I'm Paul-Jervis Heath. As you said, I'm principal at a design studio called Modern Human. We're a design studio and innovation practice. We do product and service design for all types of clients, actually. You know, we work with startups who come to us with their nascent ideas, and we help turn them into new products and services and launch them. Or we work with, and we work right through to big businesses like Tesco Bank, where we help them innovate, create new services, improve the services that they've got, launch new products, all of those kind of things. So that's what we do at Modern Human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm Amjid Rasool, and I am head of service design at Tesco Bank. So basically, service design forms part of a bigger design practice at Tesco Bank. Our roots originated in digital, and slowly over time, as design deepens in the organisation, we are extending human-centred design to solve a broader range of problems. As a bank, we are wholly owned by Tesco, and our mission is to be the bank for Tesco shoppers, and a large part of Tesco's ethos is providing the very best customer experience to its shoppers.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think that's also something you took into account in the project that you won the award for. Could you also introduce the project that you worked on together to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off. So there's quite an interesting backstory to this one. So before we started this project, as I mentioned earlier, as a design practice, we had been working on, strategic projects, but in the main, it was in digital. Yeah, so it was very much our role as a design practice was to craft and create digital experiences. Now, having had success in that domain, certainly a lot of our stakeholders and exec were interested in could we apply some of that thinking and that approach, to broader business problems? And so, there was a desire to look at the experience we give customers when they make a complaint. And I think our exec team and indeed our stakeholders are very interested to say, how do we actually focus on people first and foremost? And that's how that project came about. So for us as a design practice, it was really exciting because it was one of our first non-digital experience projects. So that was important for us. But fundamentally, it was about recognizing that a complaint is human interaction that is quite complicated. And, it's not as simple as thinking that a technology solution in itself will solve that problem. And so that's how that project came about.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one general question about the bank before we go more into the project. Mm-hmm. Is Tesco Bank a young bank or is it an old bank?
So we're relatively young. So compared to, traditional banks that have maybe been in existence for hundreds of years, we are very, very young, we started out as a joint venture with the Royal Bank of Scotland, and then the bank became wholly owned by Tesco.
Yeah. And do you think that makes a difference in how you deal with the digital age as a bank compared to the more traditional older banks?
It's a really interesting question. I think that in itself doesn't make us, any better. I think really what makes a difference is our recognition and increasing importance that we place on human-centered design. That's the key for us because, and as we'll get into it, during this conversation, a lot of the times we are dealing with, human problems, and the challenge is sometimes to think that we can invent or apply, technology to that problem to solve it. Whereas technology often is just an enabler, and unless we really know what those genuine problems are and actually what is important, both to customers and to colleagues in our bank, that's the success factor for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Paul, from your point of view as an agency, could you introduce the project?
Yeah, it was really nice to be invited to kind of partner with Amjid and his team to take this kind of first step into service design and beyond digital design, because it's quite core to what we do. And so the way we kind of went about it is we really wanted to get bank colleagues from across the bank involved in the project. So we set up a pop-up design studio in Glasgow, which is the call centre. So it's relatively unusual to set up a design studio in a call centre, but it's a great place to be if you want to be close to customers, because customers are calling in all the time, every day, to talk to people about their products and services and solve problems and complain and all of the things that customers do. And so we set up this pop-up design studio. We got a variety of people from the contact center there. We got the head of complaints. We got somebody who actually handles complaints, and we got somebody who answers the phone front line. And we brought them into the team along with some of Amjid's team and some of my team to work with us on the project. And I think that brought a very different sense to the project team. They had a very real view of what customers are actually calling in about. They also had the way, they knew very, very intimately the different ways that they had to deal with certain complaints. And as you can imagine, banking, there's regulation and all of those kind of things. So certain conversations have to go down certain routes. But what it allowed us to do is it allowed us to step back. It allowed us to listen to a whole heap of customer complaints calls. I think we listened to about 400 calls. We identified the root cause of each of those calls. We also traced through all of the bank's processes around complaints and created a current state service blueprint that mapped how things moved from the customer experience at the front to the back office systems behind the scenes. And then what we did is we went out and interviewed customers who had complained to really understand what had driven their complaint, how they felt about their complaint, the emotions at the time, and all of those kind of things. So really interesting to get this 360-degree view of a complaint from both the people on the phone handling that call when a customer is, upset and calling in to challenge something or complain about something, and then the other side to listen to the customer and what was on their mind and what they think about and how they'd prepared themselves to make that call and how they'd kind of armed themselves with the information and all of that kind of thing that we all do before we complain. None of us are cut out naturally for complaining. Everyone kind of gears themselves up a little bit to it. And so, understanding the psychological processes on both sides of that call was really interesting, because what you quickly understand is that both parties on when you're handling a complaint are under a certain degree of stress. If you're the person who's doing the complaining, you're under stress and you're thinking about how to get your point across, and you're maybe angry about what's happened or upset about what's happened or concerned about what's happened. On the other side, from a call handler's point of view, from a colleague's point of view here at the bank, you've got an upset person who's on the phone and you're trying to work out how you please that customer. You're trying to work out how you fix their problem. You're trying to work out what are the important things in what they're telling you as well, because customers quite often don't know the perfect way to describe their complaint to get it across to someone. And so that complex interplay is a very human moment to start and unpick and really understand the factors. And so that let us get a really interesting perspective on actually what does drive complaints. What are people looking for when they do complain? How do complaints look from a customer's point of view? How could those complaints be categorized from a customer's point of view and from a bank's point of view as well? And, those assessing all of those different elements as we look at both perspectives was a really interesting project.
Mm-hmm. Did that mean that you also really dived into the psychology of stress and looked at what evokes stress, how you can handle those kind of things? Because I can imagine that's something which is very, very important in these kind of complex situations.
Absolutely. If you think about what's happening in your brain when you're in a stressful situation, your brain's releasing cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And what cortisol does is it limits your holistic thinking. You start to think in very straight lines. And so if you're the customer, you've built yourself up to making this complaint. You take a deep breath, dial the number, and launch into talking to the person who answers the phone. And of course, you're experiencing an increased level of cortisol. When you answer the call as a call handler, very similar situation. You could be talking to a customer who's very upset. And so your stress levels are high, your adrenaline levels and cortisol levels are very high too. And so the actual thinking ability of both parties is impaired in that moment. And so how do you and what can you do to facilitate that conversation, knowing that both parties are suffering from increased cortisol levels and trying to solve a problem, and they're having a very kind of human moment in that.
And I think just to build to that, I think there's an important point, which is it wasn't just about stress for customers. It was equally important to us was how do we enable our colleagues who are providing that experience to customers? How do we enable them to, really deal with, customers in the best possible way? And so through this project and the different research we did, we uncovered loads of things that contribute, in their own way to what inhibits, ultimately a great customer experience. And I think there's an important point here, which we've kind of started to cover, which was, for us, this project, and certainly, the work we did, it went beyond just what we did. It was also about how, because as Paul mentioned at the start of the call, when we set this piece of work up, we purposefully brought together, a cross-discipline team together. Now, while, if you work in lots of organizations, you've heard it before, cross-discipline team, agile, whatever. But for us, it was about bringing people into, the design process. And actually, everyone in that team was following human-centered design, led and facilitated by, the design practice. So we had people, who are dealing with complaints day in, day out, people who head that up. And through that process, we started to get a really deep understanding of, from a colleague point of view, what's important from their perspective to enable them to serve customers better. And that's important because often we sometimes think of customer experience and we only think of the customer. And while that's really important, we have to recognize that actually, it's all customer experience. It's just that some parts of that experience are played through, a colleague who's delivering that experience.
I think that's really key. I think there's two parts in there that are important. I think, first of all, when we're talking about neuropsychology, when we're talking about cognitive load, when we're talking about the cortisol and adrenaline, it's very easy to sound clever, but make it sound very academic. When you're working with the people who are actually on the phones, what you're essentially doing is you're explaining some of their reactions and the reactions they see in some of their colleagues. You're explaining to them why actually they do find it hard to take a complaint call. And bearing in mind that complaints at Tesco Bank, a colleague will deal with a complaint maybe once a month or twice a month. So it's not something you're dealing with all the time. And so as soon as you realize it is a complaint, your stress levels increase as a result of that. And colleagues who answer calls could describe that to us, but they hadn't realized it was normal. They hadn't realized that actually that is a normal response for any human being in that situation. And so it gives them a way to talk to each other about how they handle complaints. And it gave managers and people around the call center, we use the term cognitive load to describe the effort that people are having to make to handle calls. Because obviously when you're taking a call, it's not like chatting to a friend. It's not like us talking now where we're free to kind of think of what we're saying and stuff like that. You've got to, yes, you're in a headset, you're talking to someone who's upset. So that's the first kind of tricky situation. But then you've got systems in front of you where you have to record certain things about the call. You have to look up certain details about the customer. And so it's the equivalent of driving down the motorway at 80 mile an hour, having an argument with your, other half in the passenger seat, whilst trying to read a billboard, going past. You are under an awful lot of pressure in that moment. And being able to point that out and actually say, this is a very skilled job that people are doing. It might not seem like it. It might seem when you listen to be just conversation. Actually, it's a very skilled thing that people are doing, and it needs to be treated as such. You can't treat handling complaints as an innate skill. It's not something that people are either good at or not good at. You have to work out how you teach it, how you coach it, how they get better at doing it, and how you develop that skill. And being able to give people language around describing that was really good, and seeing that language then being used to describe complaints and the moment of complaint and all of those kind of things was really fulfilling from my point of view to kind of see a different mindset start to establish itself around complaints and a new nomenclature kind of getting established.
Yeah, I think it could be super interesting to bring those people together. And I think that's also what a lot of service designers probably already are doing together with other companies. Like they organize workshops where they have all those people in the same room, and they all of a sudden realize, oh no, I never knew that from your side, and vice versa. But then what I'm wondering is how you took the next step. Like you said, you set up a design studio, a pop-up studio in Glasgow. How did you bring together the right people? How did you decide which responsibility, which profile would have? How did you collaborate over time? Did you keep on organizing workshops, or also online collaboration? Did some people get more of a designer role, other more of a feedback role? How did that system of your pop-up design studio look like?
I think that's a really interesting point, because workshops aren't enough. Mm-hmm. They're a good start, but workshops aren't enough. And I think what we needed to do with this project is we needed to observe people first of all, rather than them coming to a workshop and telling us how they felt. We needed them to also tell us how they felt. But the point about the pop-up design studio is that it wasn't just a workshop; is just a snapshot in time, and you find out about whatever the subject of that workshop is, and if it's well facilitated, you can obviously get lots of rich information from it. But actually, I think the magic with this project is in the pop-up design studio, we had people on the project full time, 5 days a week, coming together to solve the problems, to understand the problems first of all, to immerse themselves in the world of complaints, to use that immersion to inspire them to then imagine how complaints could be different. And so I think it has to go deeper than workshops. Workshops are important and they have their place, but I don't think they're sufficient to get really under the skin of difficult problems like this one. What do you think, Amjid?
Yeah, so I would just build on that. So I think from my perspective, there's a bit before. So when we set this piece of work up, we deliberately set it up as what we call a design runway. So what we wanted to get away from, and we've experienced it, a lot of organizations, I have certainly, is that pieces of work are set up, it's kind of like, right, we're going to deliver something, and you've got an army of people ready, whether it's cutting code or whatever you're doing, and suddenly at some moment there is a kind of a point where people say, what is it we're actually doing? And so the first important thing we did was we set this piece of work up as a design runway, which is very much a phase where we are doing strategic design, and at its simplest level we're getting really clear and aligned on what are the genuine problems we want to solve, and get alignment on the direction that we want to follow. Okay, and we can cover that later. I think to Paul's point, the magic for this project was it was about bringing together this team who were working on the problem. And so to a certain extent, everyone lost their day job title and they were just part of the redesign team. And that was quite scary, from a designer's point of view. For us, as a design practice, there was a wee bit about, as we were maturing, we had to recognize that actually we're relinquishing a bit of control, of design. We can get a bit precious, but actually what we're doing is we're bringing people into the process to collaboratively and collectively solve a problem. And so it wasn't really, while we certainly had workshops with wider colleagues, the magic was, for 12 weeks or 14 weeks, we had this group of people in the studio, sharing a space, working through a problem together.
And it's amazing how you uncover people's hidden skills. So one of the best elevator pitches for what we found on the project came from Vari, who was the frontline colleague on this project. On another project, we found one of the people who was working on the project, we found had a fine art degree and worked in the contact centre over in Glasgow for Tesco Bank. So you uncover people's hidden skills and you allow them to use those skills in a design process, and you kind of take those skills and you use them and point them at a problem. And that's quite different to working in a day job where you're kind of given a role and told to fulfill a single role. So I think that's been quite popular about the process, hasn't it?
So. And I think also it helps you. It certainly helped us shortcut a lot of things, So, we had people who had been dealing with complaints, for months or years. And so, things that we might assume we could quickly just validate with these people really quickly, and so it led to much more richer kind of directions that we pursued.
Yeah. I was wondering, Amjid, setting up this pop-up, how was that perceived by the staff in the bank or in the call center? Was there any friction in the beginning? Did people feel a bit awkward, or did it really go very smoothly? How was it at the start?
I mean, from our perspective, it was really smooth. I think, we took over a space, in our customer service center, and very much, it was, our pop-up was on the floor where, the complaints team sit. And so it kind of broke this barrier, which was there's a group of people who are going to kind of, sit in a dark room and, then come up with a solution and impose it. And so I think actually being very close to where the action was happening was important. I think probably what was also really important was by virtue of colleagues seeing their peers as part of that team, just kind of reassured everyone. So it didn't feel like, hey, these group of designers or this external parties coming in, they saw people like Nicola, who was the head of complaints, in that team with us. And so it kind of just kind of lowered the stakes, and there was a bit of, it helped us, kind of create that trust straight away, with the team. And I think that's an important point, which is probably what your question is really getting to, is, how do you, avoid, these projects or this kind of activity being seen as a threat, and instead it's very much about, hey, we're here to, take advantage of some opportunities and genuinely make things better for customers and and colleagues. And throughout the process, we involved wider colleagues, because, what was important for us was to absolutely recognize that, the colleagues will absolutely have to play a really key role in designing the service, and have ownership in that as well.
Yeah, this pop-up protocol is something that we use quite a lot at Modern Human, and I think there is as Amjid rightly identifies, there is a danger that people see people coming in and assume it's a threat. I think in location, having it on the complaints floor where complaints colleagues were actually kind of sitting, they could see it, they could see it happening. They could see what we were working on. The room had glass walls, so they could see in, so they didn't feel like what was happening was a secret. They could see their colleagues being part of it. But even with that, there is a point, about 4 or 5 weeks in, where people are going, okay, great, they're all sat in that room. Now, what are they working on? And so that's where you really have to engage and have a kind of communications plan within the host organization to then say, okay, this is what we're working on, and this is the process that we're using, and this is how we're taking your views into account, and this is something that's being done with you, not to you. And that carried on throughout. So Tesco Bank has contact centres in Newcastle and Glasgow, and we were very careful to make sure that regularly we would make sure that we checked in at both sites to share what we were doing, to share what was coming out, to share what we were seeing, so that people could go, yeah, I recognise that. Or actually, when that happens because of this. And they could throw their own thoughts and ideas and things into the mix. So it felt very collaborative and something that happened with people who handle complaints, not to people who handle complaints. And that's true of any pop-up design studio. There's a danger when you create a design studio that it's separate, or it exists within a bubble within the host organization. And that's where you risk the danger of an organization developing a Teflon coating where whatever innovations that you actually come up with or changes that you come up with just slide straight off. And I think the process that we use in setting up those pop-up studios tries to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and I think that's something that indeed happens quite often. But of course, it's important what happens after the pop-up studio, because what you said was about 14 weeks that the studio was there. But what happened afterwards? So during the studio, you analyzed the pain points, stuff that could be improved. You came up with new concepts that could be developed. And what did you do after the studio? And was it already set before those 14 weeks how the next steps would be taken? Was it already strategically planned, or at least you knew that you had the budget and the time to continue working on it? Or how did that go?
Yeah, no, super question. So I think one of the reasons, so if I go back and then I'll answer your question, one of the reasons we embarked on this project was before we started this, there was a prevailing view, amongst the organisation that perhaps a new IT system or a new complaint system would solve the problem. Yeah, and it just so happened that the complaint system that we had was, due to come out of service, and so. For us, that was an important point, and for our stakeholders where, there was this feeling that we know complaints is really important, both from a customer and a colleague point of view, but is it really as simple as replacing a complaint system, And so that's what led us to do this project. There was always commitment that we would do something. At the start of the project, the commitment was we are going to, invest in a new complaint system. And I think to testament of our sponsors and stakeholders, what they recognised is by following the design process, certainly at the start, we weren't sure of exactly what we'd uncover and exactly what direction, we would pursue. All we could be confident of is by following this process. At the end, we will design a future state that is completely outside in, designed, with a firm focus on people. And so, that was important context. I think to answer your question, there was commitment, both from an investment perspective and a priority perspective, to do something, for complaints. And so very practically, as we transitioned from the runway into the delivery, the key thing here was throughout the runway, we had weekly check-ins with our key stakeholder group. And that was really important because we took them on the journey, and also they were regularly, giving us their views and their perspectives. So collectively, everyone had ownership in the direction and the solution we were taking. And so, by the time we got to the end of the runway, and this for me is probably a really crucial point, of the team that were working on the redesign, the spine of that team then formed the delivery team. So they carried on that vision, and they then went and we established a delivery program to deliver that future vision. So the product owner who was in, during our design runway was the product owner that continued to deliver that future vision, So, there's always, we have, as you can imagine, there's practical considerations like investment, prioritization. That was always in plan. So really, for us, it was about being really confident of the vision we want to pursue, and then how do we set up the next stage of the project, the delivery, to actualize that vision. And the thing for me that made the difference was almost half of the team that were part of the initial redesign then carried on to the redesign phase for delivery.
Yeah, that relates to a question I was about to ask. Indeed, after the pop-up is done, do people go back to their regular day jobs? I mean, they are changed individuals after an experience like that, I'm sure. And how practically do you go about making sure that they have a different point of view, a different way of wanting to work, that they can actually do this?
Yeah, so certainly from the complaints project's point of view, some of the key colleagues that were part of that then formed the kind of team, the core of the team that delivered it. So they didn't go back to their day job in the sense of exactly what it was like before it. Their day job then became, how do we deliver this future complaints experience? I think
the bank created the space for them to do this. Was that anticipated, or was that something unexpected?
No, so it was. I mean, certainly the delivery of a future complaints experience was anticipated. So that was always in plan. I think what was unexpected was the impact that the design, just following design had on, colleagues. And so certainly for a lot of people, to your point, it really changed the way they started to approach, everyday tasks, it changed the ways that they looked at, from a customer point of view, try to understand customers, but also how they approach problem solving. And, we've had that feedback where actually it's, to a certain extent, those are the things that are more important, is the impact we have on people's lives and actually how we are helping them, almost collectively improve, the bank and Tesco as well, and do that.
Yeah, it brings me to another thing I have been thinking about recently. It is, of course, a challenge on how people's job will change in the future, and some of the more repetitive jobs will be taken over by computers, etc. So that means that people will have to work in a more creative and collaborative way. So I'm sure that's also something which is important for the bank, that their employees are trained in different ways of thinking, so they can apply it in your job, like what you say, more of a problem-solving way of working. Is that something which was important from the beginning, or was it like a side effect, or is there something else happening in the bank around this evolution?
Yeah, so I think I'll start off with that one. I think it's certainly there wasn't a grand plan for us when we started this project, and actually one of the biggest learnings for us that we carried on is when we bring people together, the mission isn't to make people designers overnight. And we got really strong feedback from our colleagues about that, and we've changed that on subsequent projects. It's just about exposing people to a different way of working. I think to your point, and it's an important one, is, for Tesco Bank and Tesco, it's really important that we leverage the capabilities that digital offers. That said, we absolutely recognise that there will be moments in that customer experience where it is important or imperative for customers to speak to us, And so, the role of our colleagues working in, the customer service centre is changing, where they're dealing with more, complex, more unique kind of cases. And so what this project showed is just a broadly, not design, but just broadly the types of skills that people need to evolve with. I think the other thing, which your question touches upon is, even if I look at from a design point of view, our roles are changing, and our role, certainly from in a Tesco perspective, is we're moving away from being the hands-on craft makers to more, it's about facilitation, because as we grow design and deepen design, the role of our design practice, then starts to morph into how do we facilitate, design, in this organization, and how do we take people without, who are not necessarily have the badge of a designer, but have all the right problem-solving capabilities. How do we take them on the journey? And so, even from a designer point of view, we are developing, evolving new skills, in that as well.
Yeah, I think there's two excellent points in there. I think the first one is that people's jobs, it's not about people's jobs changing in the future, it's about people's jobs changing right now. That actually, if you're in customer services, digital has removed a lot of the transaction-based interactions that you would have. And what that leaves you with is it leaves you with the most difficult, the most challenging, the most stressful kind of customer interactions to deal with. And that means that the job is changing for people who work in a contact center in a bank like the one here at Tesco Bank. It means that you are under higher stress levels at work, and organizations need to then adapt around that. The days of measuring average handling time for calls is, I think, are well and truly over, because those type of transactional calls are all moving to digital channels, and rightly so. It's easier for a customer to serve themselves, and they don't need the human being at the end. When they do need a human being is when things go wrong, when they become uncertain, when there's a problem or any of these kind of things. And actually, that's when it's most important that the organisations that we deal with show empathy and help. And that's a very human thing that is, I think, will be very difficult to automate. And just like, I mean, in the UK, we had a trend maybe 5 years ago of companies advertising UK-only call centres. And I think we're about to see a trend of companies advertising human-only call centres. So that actually, when you phone a company with a difficult problem, you can guarantee that you'll get through to a real person who will try and understand your problem, understand why you're upset, solve the problem, yes, but reassure you and make it, explain why it might have happened and all of those kind of things. I think Amjid's point about the role of designer changing is absolutely right. I think from being a design studio, we recognise our own role is changing. It used to be that we worked as a very tight studio designing products or services for clients. And much more, it's that we're facilitating design within clients and doing an awful lot more design thinking and applying design to really strategic level challenges. And it's become much more about designing with clients rather than designing for clients. And I think that's what the kind of Modern Human Tesco Bank partnership kind of shows, that kind of deepening relationship between a design studio like ours and an organisation like yours, Amjid.
Yeah, and that extends, beyond agency and client. That extends into organisation. So, like I said, even as a practice within the bank, we're designing with, our relevant colleagues, to design new services, new propositions, new experiences, and that's really important,
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm sure lots of our listeners are thinking now, I need to get one of those pop-ups myself. For both of you, what would be your number one tip, Paul, from an agency point of view, and Amjid from an in-house point of view? What's your number one tip to make a successful pop-up?
I think the key thing for us when we help clients create pop-ups is not to think of them as too insular a bubble. That actually what you then, if you're not careful, what you can create is just like where you create, innovation labs and things like that. You get this them and us mentality. If you're not careful, where it's, only they're allowed to do innovation, only they're allowed to do design. What you really want is, and if you're going to really take the whole organization on a journey, you want that pop-up studio to be more like a beachhead, where actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to, yes, do the act of design in that pop-up studio, but also what you're trying to do is talk to everyone else in the organization about what it means to be doing design, to be taking in their ideas, their thoughts, their experiences, but also be using the environment that you've created that pop-up within to prototype, to pilot, to test things so that people see things both going into the pop-up and coming back out and being tested in the real world as well. And that stops it becoming an insular bubble as perhaps, organizations that have set up innovation labs in the past have found that these things can become.
Yeah. And I think for me, what I would say is don't get fixated on the space or the idea of a pop-up studio. Instead, become more passionate and become more fixated on how you're creating change and how you're, involving people and how you're working across boundaries. Because, the space in itself is just a vehicle, and you can easily spend too much time thinking about how to dress the space, what to have in the space, whereas what you really need is just a space, And the other thing is you'll learn as you go through it. So we learn loads of, things like even simple acts of, in our space having, we've moved to open space now, but for our pop-up studio, just have the door open, right? It just sounds really, really trivial, but it actually just creates that sense of connection, regularly, go out, invite people in and stuff like that. And so for me, it's like, don't get fixated on the space. That's just a mechanism. Get more passionate about what you're trying to do is, really design people first services. And that's the most important thing. And to do that, you need people. You need a space, yes, but it's not the space that makes a difference.
It's been so successful. You've now got a permanent studio.
Yeah. I should have added that. Is that following that project and just generally our commitment, to human-centered design, but also customer and colleague experience. We now have a dedicated studio in our service centre in Glasgow. We've got 2 studios in the bank, but we now have a dedicated space, a dedicated studio, in our service centre.
Okay, so that's still the people who were there before. Is it like, and do they take on different projects now, or what?
No. So basically, the studio is only constant, and our designers. But what we'll do is, as we embark on new projects, we bring different colleagues into it. So we've done projects in insurance, and other spaces, and so similar model. Always refining it, but we will have cross-discipline team where we will bring other people, into that process. Because as you can imagine, the bank's broad, and so there will be subject matter experts, and it really just depends on the problem that we're solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So you guys won the award, Best in Private Sector. What does the award mean to you?
I think for me, personally, I think the award is a really important recognition, of first and foremost the work we did, but more, the impact that we had, and so that award meant a lot, as a designer, to be recognised by peers, and people that we respect, hugely, to recognise the work we did. Beyond that, I think what's really important, and this might sound a bit unpopular, is really the most proudest thing is the impact the work is having, on our colleagues, on our customers. And so the award is like an icing, it's really nice, don't get me wrong, it's the icing on the cake, and I'm absolutely delighted to win it and have that recognition. But our driver is always, how do we make things better for our customers, and so that impact is I'm more proud of that, but I'm equally delighted that, the bank and Tesco, and Modern Human, we've been recognised for the work that we did.
Yeah, as a design studio, it's really nice to receive external recognition. You spend a lot of time working on projects with clients, and you hope that after you finished, your client is happy and that you've made a difference to their customers and the people who use their products and services. But it's often very difficult to benchmark how you are doing as a design studio against your peers. And I think what the best award schemes allow you to do as a design studio is to understand how the work you're doing relates to the work wider of an industry. At Modern Human, we've been really lucky to win a number of awards last year, and I think what that means to us is it helps us to benchmark our work against the product design, the service design industry, and really understand how, yes, we're creating happy clients, but also we're creating groundbreaking work that changes people's lives. And I think that's what's important.
Yeah, and I think to add to that is also what was interesting for us was, winning that award, just to echo, what we said before, that recognition by our peers, was really important. But it was almost like, our bank, we won the award collectively. So there was a really lovely halo effect where, lots of, while there was a dedicated team working on that piece of work, that project went and, a lot of colleagues were involved in, delivering that service, which was a key theme of the conference last year as well. And so, that, award was, very much, for a broader range of people rather than, the product of just that core redesign team. And that halo effect has been really important,
Okay, well, that's great. Well, congratulations, both you and the entire team, of course, who worked on it. It was also really interesting to speak to you. I think it's really great to hear about this project, and I think it's going to inspire many of us to go about it in the same way as some of the tips you gave. If people want to find out more about this project, find out more about Tesco Bank or Modern Human, where can people reach out and find you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm delighted. I'm always humbled that when people are reaching out to basically ask us about this piece of work. So, I can be found on LinkedIn, Amjid Rasool. I would encourage people, if they are interested, want to find out more, then very happy for them to get in touch, because, the one thing for me is kind of broadly, we're all on the same journey from a design point of view, just at different points of that journey. And so, if, we can share our experiences, help other people and equally learn from others, then I'm really, really, keen for that to happen. So yeah, probably the easiest is, I'm on LinkedIn, get in touch, and, I'm really happy to take it from there.
And people can find out more about Modern Human at either on Twitter, modhuman, or they can find out on our website, modernhuman.co, or they can, find me on LinkedIn, Paul-Jervis Heath, and I'm always happy to have conversations about all the things that we've talked about. They're always interesting conversations to have between designers, I think.
Great. That was super interesting. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all these interesting insights from this project. And congratulations again with your award.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A lot.
We'll add these links to servicedesignpodcast.com. So go there to find the links to Amjid and Paul's LinkedIn and the websites, etc. Thanks a lot, guys, and see you in the future.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
The Service Design Podcast was brought to you by the Service Design Network and Night Moves. For more information, previous episodes, or to join the conversation, please visit servicedesignpodcast.com. For more information about the Service Design Network, visit service-design-network.org, and for Night Moves, visit nightmoves.be. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to this podcast. The intro and outro music is from If the Stars Grow Dim Tonight by Hydrogen Sea featuring I Will, I Swear. Until next time.